Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to talk about Polkadot and the native DOT token. If you guys like the content, subscribe to the channel. Let's go for 100,000 subscribers. Also, give the video a thumbs up and check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So DOT has been one of the better performing coins recently that we've been following. We discussed on the channel the theoretical accumulation zone between $3 and $6. Okay, this was our theoretical accumulation zone. And we said back then, if you go back and watch the videos, we said back then that, we'll probably look back at this time and talk about how, it was a great accumulation zone. But now, DOT has had a pretty impressive move. Okay, it's had a pretty impressive move from December 27th. It has rallied to the current valuation around 230%. To the peak, it was around 300% or so. So it's been doing fairly well over the last few weeks. Now, the purpose of this video is to draw parallels between the launch of Ethereum in 2015 and the launch of Polkadot in 2020. Now, the first thing we know is that they will behave differently. Ethereum had a lot less competition back then, so we don't anticipate that the moves will be identical by any means. DOT will probably carve its own path that its price action will take. We know that it will. It will not perform in the same manner exactly as Ethereum did. Now, the reason why we say that is because when we make these comparisons, it can make some people somewhat disillusioned with, okay, well, since Ethereum did this, then DOT also has to do this. But I also see people saying things like, this is definitively the end of the run. And the point here is to say, okay, well, we simply do not know. A lot of it depends on Bitcoin. We know that a lot of it will depend on Bitcoin. For instance, if Bitcoin is still just chugging along, either moving sideways or going up, there's a decent chance that DOT is going to ultimately continue its run. Okay? And it can have cooldown periods. One of the things we've already seen is that it rallied from $5 up to around $12, 136%, before retracing about 45% back down to less than $7. And then from there, it went on another rally that was about 200%. So these things are not going to monotonically increase, and we also know that it ultimately depends on Bitcoin. Now, the relationship that we're going to look at is the relationship of DOT to Bitcoin and Ethereum to Bitcoin at launch. And there's a lot of similarities. Okay, so we're just going to go through them. The first one is we notice DOT launched here. We have our price action starting in August. Okay, and it started in mid-August. It rallied on up till the end of August, early September, before it then bled against Bitcoin until late December. Okay, so keep that in mind. So DOT, let's just take it from, it's hard to get at an exact launch because the exchange just goes crazy when a coin launches. But let's say it went up around 140% in August against Bitcoin. Now let's look at Ethereum. We're ignoring the launch and we're just going to take it from down here. Look at this. Also launched in August, from mid-August until a few days later, it went up 248%. By the end of August, it had gone up around 140%. But one of the things you note is that both DOT and Ethereum rallied against Bitcoin in August, the same month that they hit the open market. So that's the first thing. So pretty similar launch times in terms of the month. It was just 5 years later. Now, what can we then discuss? Well, we then see that, well, from that point, it bled against Bitcoin. And Ethereum bled against Bitcoin until October, and then it had a nice little rally. And it rallied starting October 20th. It rallied 164% to October 29th. DOT started rallying here in December, so it was a little bit delayed. From the bottom, it rallied about 82%. So pretty similar so far. Okay, Ethereum, major pump, and then subsequent Q4 bleed against Bitcoin. Ethereum had another pump in October, and then it kept bleeding until early January. DOT, pretty similar thing. Pump in August, then a bleed in Q4, a pump in December, back down. So then we see the move back down 35, 36% against Bitcoin. Ethereum also had a move back down. Let's see how significant it was. Around 47%. If you go to the bottom of the wick, 67%. So another move down against Bitcoin. If you take it all the way to where it started pumping, it was a 50% drop. And then you see that in January, Ethereum started rallying against Bitcoin. And one of the things we note is that it rallied up to around this point. And this point corresponded to the prior area that we reached at launch right here. And we hung out there for a little while. In fact, let's take a measured move to see how long Ethereum, the valuation of Ethereum, stayed constant, more or less. Not exactly constant, but from the top of the wick, it ultimately bled down 23, 24%. This was Ether Bitcoin. But it moved that way. If we take a measured move from when we first got to this point to when we broke through it and definitively broke through it, it took us 13 days, okay? And so it came back down about 20%, rallied back up, and then broke through approximately 2 weeks later. Now, if we go look at DOT, let's just see what it did. So it had a nice rally straight up to this point, a wick up here, which also is around the area we had our top at launch, around it. It's not exactly, it's approximate. And from the move, after this short-term correction, it moved up approximately 128%. Well, we know from here, Ethereum bled back down about 20%. And if you look at DOT from the top, it's also bled down so far about 16% against Bitcoin. So there are some similarities. Now, the dangerous part comes from extrapolating. Of course, it's always easy to look back and say, okay, well, this is what happened to Ethereum, and now we can easily identify the pattern, but we were identifying it when it happened. We were talking about the comparison between DOT Bitcoin and Ether Bitcoin even around these points as we continue to rally up. Now we're at the top, and it leaves us wondering, will DOT continue this move that Ethereum saw? So the first thing we'll do is see how different they are. So from the bottom here, from the absolute bottom that it reached on the candles to get to the top, it was a 340% move. For DOT, from the bottom of the candles to the top, it was a 170% move. So one thing I would say to expect, of course, none of this is financial advice. It's just my own analysis of the markets. If not, it's somewhat naive perhaps, but this is just my own analysis of the markets. We would expect diminishing returns, okay? DOT has more competition than Ethereum had back then. We also see diminishing returns in terms of the entire total market capitalization of the cryptocurrency asset class. So the idea that DOT will then rally the same amount as Bitcoin might cause you to be misled. It might not, but it certainly could cause you to be misled. So what we're going to do now is say, okay, well, suppose that DOT broke out above this in 2 weeks. Okay, I mean, obviously a lot of people are really anxious, and if it's not happening today, then they lose interest. But let's just suppose that it took another 2 weeks for it to rally above it. Of course, it could rally above it at any time, or it could come crashing back down at any time. A lot of that just depends on Bitcoin. Now let's go about 2 weeks out. So 13 days, which is what Ethereum was, it would take us till the end of January. So the end of January is where then from the first test to the top that it took Ethereum to ultimately break out again against Bitcoin. So when looking at this, where do we look to next? Well, the next thing would be, well, where did Ethereum rally after it broke out? Because that would be the next obvious thing to look at. Well, it had an immediate rally up another 158% over 5 days. Now, again, one of the things we see is that Ethereum's rally from the bottom to back to the top was 340%. DOT's was 170, so about half. Let's suppose that DOT rallies approximately half what Ethereum did again if it's able to break that upper resistance against Bitcoin. So that would correspond to, so this is 160%. Let's just say it rallies 80% against Bitcoin. Obviously, a lot of this is pretty hand wavy type stuff. We also know that it did it over 5 days. So let's go take a look. So supposing we break through it on January 29th, which is obviously probably not the day we will break through it, but if we did, then where would it take us? Well, 80% up against Bitcoin over 5 days would take us to a valuation of approximately of 96,000 Satoshis by early February. And of course, you might wonder, well, what price in USD does that correspond to? Well, obviously, it depends on the price of Bitcoin. But you can think about an 80% move if Bitcoin remains constant. It's not that hard to think about, okay, well, what would that mean in terms of USD if the price of the asset you're comparing that percent move to is in fact remaining constant? But let's follow it further. So it had an 80% move over 5 days, and from there it retraced back down 54% over 8 days or 7 days or so. Let me line this up. So 54% over 7 days. So if DOT were to continue, we would expect volatility to be reduced to the downside too, likely. Let's say it had a 25% retracement or something. So then maybe it would take it back to this region over 7 days. And where would that put us? It would put us in this region. And then the final move that Ethereum had was this last one against Bitcoin that took us through March of 2016. And obviously we know that Ethereum ultimately trended much higher later in the market cycle. But again, if DOT were to supposedly follow Ethereum's path, DOT launched in August of 2020. Ethereum launched in August of 2015. It took Ethereum from launch. Let's see how long it took. So let's take it from launch to see how long it took for Ethereum to reach its peak for this cycle. And one of the things we're going to do is we could measure it to here against Bitcoin, which would be 675 days. This was the peak of Ethereum in USD. So that was 907 days. So let's look at two separate things. Let's look at Ethereum's peak 674 days out and 907 and compare that to DOT. Well, if it were 674 days out for DOT launch, let's see where that would put us. 674 days. So that would put us, let me zoom this out a little bit more. So that would put us around May of 2022. And we will ultimately need to switch this over to a weekly time frame so we can get some of these years going back out. And then, of course, if it were to go out, say, 900 days from launch in the same way that Ethereum did, it could ultimately end up being 2023 if it's, if we can ultimately treat it in the same manner. Now let's zoom back in and just let's look at say the short term. And when I say short term, let's look at just say Q1. So going back to Q1, where are we? So again, a lot of this is very dubious extrapolations. We know that Ethereum will behave differently than DOT from launch. We've already seen diminished volatility. But supposing it had this 54% dump, and then afterwards it pumped another 369%. Let's just say that's 360%, and half of that would be 180. So if it were to do something like that, and then we went up 180% from that level, then it would correspond to 200,000 Satoshis, which is essentially another 5x against Bitcoin. And theoretically, if it were to follow Ethereum, that could happen by mid-March, right? That could theoretically happen by mid-March, so somewhere out in this ballpark, okay? Now, we always need to maintain a pragmatic view of the markets. This is not a channel to get swept away as to what necessarily could happen. We just want to consider all possibilities so that you are prepared for various possibilities during the market cycle. For instance, if you did see DOT do something like this, where it rallied, it stayed below here for a couple more weeks and then rallied up, then rallied back down, and then ultimately did something like that before correcting and then going into an extended 2021 where it's trying to figure out, okay, well, what is its fair value against Bitcoin? If that happens, just know we've seen this type of stuff before. We saw it with Ethereum. Okay, we saw it with Ethereum. So it's not necessarily that this move that DOT has experienced so far is that unheard of. In fact, it's just a diminished version of what we saw Ethereum do at launch. And it's crazy for new people to think about this as a diminished version because it truly shows you how insane the market was 5 years ago to give you an appreciation. And if you feel like you missed out on that, my thoughts to you, or my words to you now would just be, you're here in 2020, 2021. So the launch of Ethereum was 2020 or 2015. The launch of DOT was 2020. People in, say, 2025 looking at the market will probably look at times like this and be envious. Okay? So I would say don't worry about the past, right? You can't change it. Just seize the current moment and do the best you can. Now, always be responsible with everything. This is not financial advice. I would certainly not recommend anyone go betting the family farm. I for sure am not buying DOT at these levels. As I said before, for me, $3 to $6 was the accumulation phase. We covered this extensively on the premium list, again at intothecryptoverse.com. We still have a sale going on for the lifetime membership. So if you want to join the lifetime membership, there's a sale going on until the end of January. You can find a link to that in the description below. If you just want to join the monthly subscription, you can find that at intothecryptoverse.com. You get access to weekly reports, weekly videos, a Telegram alerts channel, a Telegram chat room, a risk dashboard, premium list live streams, a whole lot more. So check it out, intothecryptoverse.com. Now, with that said, DOT has calmed down a little bit over the last few days. Obviously, its future direction will largely depend on Bitcoin, so keep an eye on Bitcoin to see what Bitcoin does. If Bitcoin is just going to chill out here for a while, then that's probably a really good thing for DOT. If Bitcoin decides, you know what, we're correcting back down, probably not a good thing for DOT. Or if Bitcoin starts to continue higher, it might not be the best thing for DOT against Bitcoin in the short term, but it would likely be okay for DOT against USD. So hopefully this video has been informative. Again, we're not making any claims that DOT will perform like Ethereum did in any way. We're just making the comparison like we have been for the last several months that, okay, well, both Ethereum had an accumulation phase against Bitcoin and USD. DOT had it. Now they both broke out in early the following year. So for Ethereum, it was early 2016. For DOT, it's been early 2021. 5 years later, basically exactly 5 years later. So we just want to continue to follow this move over the next several months and throughout the market cycle to see where it ultimately takes us. One of the things I've always said, and that I've contended for DOT for a long time, when I was accumulating it between $3 and $6, was that it's typically a good idea to pick up a coin that has no prior bull market history, so there's none of these mental barriers that has to break through, like Ethereum. A huge barrier for Ethereum right now is obviously $1,400. DOT has no such barrier that it's looking to break because it simply did not exist on the open market last market cycle. So if you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We'll be on this journey together. Give the video a thumbs up. Let's go through for 100,000 subscribers. Also, check out the Telegram channel in the description below and turn on your alerts so that you get notified of future videos. That'll wrap it up for this video. We'll keep following Polkadot as the months progress. We'll see you next time. Bye.